The cemetery gates had barely closed behind the mourners when 7-year-old Sophie's world shattered completely. Her father, Marcus Bennett, a respected architect whose designs had shaped the city's skyline, lay now beneath cold earth. The car accident that took him had occurred on a gray Tuesday morning, though the circumstances surrounding it would later prove far more sinister than anyone had initially believed. Sophie clutched her faded, stuffed rabbit, the last gift her biological mother had given her before a tragic illness claimed her life 3 years earlier. The toy had become her only anchor to a world that suddenly felt impossibly vast and hostile. Her stepmother, Vivian, wasted no time. Within hours of returning from the funeral service, her mask of grief slipped away like a discarded costume. The woman who had entered their household merely 18 months ago now ruled it with calculated cruelty. "Clean this house," Vivian commanded, her voice sharp as broken glass. "And understand something clearly, Sophie. I am the lady of this house now. I make every decision. Your father's pathetic attempts to raise you with kindness have ended." Sophie's uncle Derek, Marcus's younger brother, arrived that evening with suitcases and a predatory smile. Where Marcus had been thoughtful and measured, Derek possessed only appetite and entitlement. He had spent years in his brother's shadow, bitter about his own failures as a business consultant, and he saw the Bennett estate as his long-overdue inheritance. The verbal abuse escalated quickly into something more physical. When Sophie hesitated at one of Vivian's commands, the woman grabbed her arm with unnecessary force and dragged her into the yard. What happened next would have broken most spirits entirely. "You need cleansing," Vivian hissed, her voice dripping with malevolence. "You carry a curse. Everyone around you dies. Your mother, your grandmother, now your father. You are poison." She hurled a bucket of ice-cold water over Sophie's small frame. The child gasped, her body convulsing with shock and cold. Neighbors witnessed the scene but retreated quickly, unwilling to involve themselves. Derek stood nearby, smoking a cigarette and laughing as if it were the finest entertainment. Sophie collapsed to the ground, her rabbit soaked and ruined beneath Derek's boot heel. She looked desperately at the watching faces, silently begging for help, but saw only closed doors and averted eyes. The sound of an expensive car engine interrupted the nightmare. A sleek luxury sedan pulled up sharply outside the gate, and a man emerged who seemed to step out of a different world entirely. His name was Victor Ashford, and at 42 he had built a real estate empire that spanned 3 states. Fortune magazine had featured him. Forbes had listed him among the nation's most successful entrepreneurs. Yet few knew the price he had paid for that success, or the wounds he carried from a childhood of abandonment and abuse. Victor froze at the sight before him. A small child, soaked and shivering, clutching a waterlogged toy. The image cracked something open in his chest, triggering memories he had spent 2 decades trying to suppress. He saw himself in her trembling form, the scared boy he had once been, abandoned to a stepfather's violence and a mother's indifference. Without hesitation, he removed his coat and draped it over Sophie's shoulders. The gesture was simple, yet it communicated something the child desperately needed to hear. You matter, you are seen, you are not alone in this. "What is happening here?" His voice carried the weight of controlled fury. Vivian's face went pale. She recognized Victor. Everyone in the city's upper echelons knew who he was. "She was being disrespectful," Vivian stammered, attempting damage control. "We were simply teaching her discipline." Victor's gaze was steady and merciless. "She's a child. Get inside." When Derek sneered and refused to move, citing family matters as none of Victor's concern, something shifted in the older man's expression. He remembered his friend Marcus, the same Marcus who, 15 years ago, had pulled him out of a darkness so complete he thought he would never see light again. Marcus had given him shelter when he had nowhere to go, friendship when he had forgotten what that meant, and a reason to believe the world contained people capable of genuine kindness. "Sophie is coming with me," Victor announced with absolute finality. Victor's penthouse became Sophie's sanctuary. He prepared warm soup, dry clothes, and, most importantly, safety. But more significantly, he discovered something hidden within the child's stuffed rabbit, a silver USB drive no larger than a fingernail. When Sophie showed him the small device, they inserted it into his laptop and heard the voice of her deceased father. The audio, recorded more than a year earlier, captured a conversation that changed everything. "What medicine is this?" Marcus's voice came through, weary but confused. "I don't need it. Every time I take it, my heart races erratically." Derek's response was cold. "The doctor prescribed it. Stop being paranoid and take it." Then Vivian's whisper, close enough to the recording device that every word was unmistakable. "Give him more. Make him drink more. Let him die already. We can't wait much longer." Sophie's cry of anguish filled Victor's apartment. "They poisoned my father." Victor contacted his attorney, a meticulous legal mind named Professor James Matthews, who specialized in complex family law and financial crimes. Within hours, they had documented the audio file, verified its authenticity, created multiple backup copies, and begun building an airtight case. But Marcus's death alone wasn't the full story. Victor's investigation uncovered something even more sinister, evidence suggesting that Marcus's first wife, Sophie's biological mother, had died not from natural illness, but from a deliberately tampered vehicle. Electronic control system logs showed impossible override entries, signs of expert sabotage. Derek had access to the car, a history of borrowing it under various pretexts. 2 deaths, 2 murders, one family destroying itself for inheritance and control. The legal battle was grueling. Vivian presented herself as a grieving stepmother, falsely claiming Victor was kidnapping Sophie for financial gain. The media, always hungry for scandal, eagerly consumed the narrative of a wealthy man exploiting a child. But Victor had witnesses. Sophie's elderly neighbor, Mrs. Patricia Holmes, came forward despite her fear, describing exactly what she had witnessed. A formerly homeless man named Thomas Gray, who had been living near the Bennett estate, testified to seeing the abuse. Emily Watts, a librarian and record specialist, discovered that stock transfer documents bearing Marcus's signature were dated while he was hospitalized in a medically induced coma. The signatures didn't match. The evidence of fraud was unambiguous. During the family court hearing, Victor sat beside Sophie as she gave her testimony. Her small voice, trembling but steady, described the cold water, the cruelty, the fear. "If they cared about me," Sophie said, "they wouldn't have done those things. They wouldn't have laughed when I cried." The judge issued an emergency protection order. Vivian and Derek were taken into custody pending criminal charges for poisoning, child abuse, and fraud. The permanent guardianship of Sophie was granted to Victor. What emerged from the rubble of suffering was something unexpected and beautiful. Victor's apartment transformed into what he called the Harbor Light Center, a refuge for children who had experienced neglect and abuse. Emily brought books and resources. Patricia, the elderly neighbor, sewed curtains with her own hands. Thomas, freshly employed at a local cafe, prepared meals. Professor Matthews handled all the legal documentation pro bono. Sophie's rabbit was carefully restored by a seamstress Victor hired. The USB drive was preserved in a waterproof case, a testament to her father's foresight and love. 1 year later, as snow fell outside the Harbor Light Center and children gathered for a Christmas celebration, Sophie stood beside Victor in front of the new sign hanging above the porch. She wore a purple scarf, his gift to her, and her eyes held something new, hope. "From now on, I'm not afraid anymore," Sophie declared, her voice clear and strong. Victor, tears in his eyes, replied simply, "Yes, my daughter, and you will never be alone again." The criminal trial concluded with substantial sentences for both Vivian and Derek. The evidence was overwhelming: audio recordings, technical forensics, witness testimony, and documentary proof of fraud. The court confirmed that Derek had deliberately tampered with the electronic control system of Sophie's biological mother's vehicle years earlier. Every piece of evil they had perpetrated was brought to light. Sophie thrived. She returned to school, made friends, and gradually learned to trust again. The Harbor Light Center expanded, providing support to other children who had suffered similar abandonment and abuse. In quiet moments, Sophie would stand before her father's photograph and whisper her gratitude. Victor understood that healing is not the absence of pain, but the presence of love strong enough to hold that pain and transform it. The story teaches a fundamental truth. Evil may hide in shadow, but justice, though sometimes delayed, never fails to arrive. And perhaps more importantly, one act of kindness, one person choosing to see a suffering child and deciding to help, can ripple outward to heal not just one life, but entire communities. Sophie had once asked if she was a curse. Victor's response was different from the cruelty that had nearly consumed her. "You are a blessing. You always were." And in the warmth of the Harbor Light Center, surrounded by people who chose to love her, Sophie finally began to believe it.